The Nintendo Entertainment System is home to many classics, plenty of which spawn legacies of their own. Castlevania was a series that cemented itself as a premier action platformer before eventually digging into an entirely new subgenre, the Metroidvania. Despite the dry well of new games, the series did get a few collections within recent years, as well as the Castlevania Nocturne animated series. Maybe someday we'll return to the main timeline in a new game. But what was it about the original that worked so well? And does it still hold up well today? That's what we're here to find out. First, we need to talk about the NES, more specifically the time at which the game came out. Today, it's hard to imagine not paying for your game online, or, for even fewer, going to your local GameStop. And games back then were sold for an average of $40 to $50, which in today's currency equates to around $120 average. That doesn't even factor into an $160 NES, which is about $426.93 today. Now, why am I talking about game prices? Video game rentals.
Introduce, why not get your game to Blockbuster? It's the mature thing to do.
If you had trouble convincing your parents to buy a game because of the price, let me know in the comments below. Because the other option just happened to be much cheaper and far better of an option for most kids back when people knew what Blockbuster was, you could just fork over a small fee to rent the game. And it's here where we get into the American release for Castlevania. Akumajo Dracula, the Japanese version, featured two difficulty modes, normal and easy, but in the Western release, easy mode was completely cut out. The NES games, for the most part, were based on ports of arcade games. Arcade games were usually pretty hard in order to let kids keep pumping in quarters, thus driving more sales. After all, if a game could be beaten in 2 hours, no one would keep playing. And this was a time before speedrunning ever became a thing. Whether or not you could even beat a game was all that really mattered. And Castlevania just so happened to offer a level of difficulty to match. It's well known as early Castlevania is known for housing some difficult, but not impossible games. The infamous knockback, stiff controls, and obnoxious enemy placement culminates into a sweaty experience, and it's that difficulty that got kids to want to keep renting the game just to beat it. But difficulty alone doesn't make an entire franchise, which leads into the next reason, the gameplay. It's obvious to everyone, but good gameplay will always triumph even if the game drives you nuts, and it's here we dive into the core reasoning behind Castlevania's success. In Castlevania, you control the vampire hunter Simon Belmont, or Shimon Belmondo in Japanese. You'll need to traverse through a large castle in order to defeat Dracula. Your main weapon is the whip, the vampire killer, and can be upgraded twice to increase its range and power. The whip feels pretty good to use. With a fully upgraded whip, you don't have the risk of getting in too close. At the same time, whipping much tankier enemies can even produce a bit of a delay in their movement as well. Spamming the whip just feels amazing to use, and that input feedback really helps sell a game. Next up is your other form of attack, the sub-weapons. By pressing the up and B button, you can unleash said weapons at enemies, but it costs hearts to use. Hearts can be acquired through whipping candles and enemies. The knife is a short, fast, and overall weak weapon. It's by far the worst sub-weapon. Axes are thrown in an arc, which can be pretty useful for dealing with aerial enemies or those on top of stairs. The holy water places down fire on the ground, which damages enemies that stand in it. Stopwatches are expensive to use, but allows you to, quite literally, stop time. Just be careful because every boss past the second will be immune to it. And last but not least, we have the boomerang or holy cross. Objectively one of the best sub-weapons. It throws a projectile and then comes right back to you, damaging enemies twice. Given that this mechanic has lasted throughout this series, it's all that shows just how good it really is. But there's more. In certain spots or defeating enemies with the same sub-weapon 10 times, you can unlock the double and triple shot. With these, you're able to unleash your special weapons 2 or 3 times in a row, respectively. Switching to a different sub-weapon will cancel the multiplier, so be careful. This, to me, is one of the best things about the game. You haven't lived until you spam 3 boomerangs in a row. Absolute cinema, as they say. Even if the game has some fairly questionable level design, it just makes you want to keep playing. But what is it about the level design that makes it so hard? There's quite a lot actually. For one, the amount of smaller enemies which can absolutely ruin your day. From the infamous Medusa heads to Fleamen, they're placed in very inconvenient locations full of pits and stairs. These enemies can be quite annoying to deal with thanks to their smaller hitbox. Add in the knockback, and it can get real easy to feel overwhelmed. As said before, stiff controls are the name of the game. You can't control your jump midair, so you have to be absolutely certain you can make the jump. You also can't jump on stairs either, so you're forced to go up and down to avoid certain enemies. Dying also causes you to lose your sub-weapon along with any double or triple shots you might have. So, depending on where it happened, you might end up being locked out of a decent sub-weapon, and that can feel awful against the later bosses. Then there's the lives. You only have 3 lives, and you can only get more after achieving a score threshold. That score threshold goes to 0 when you run out of lives and continue where you last left off. Thankfully, the game isn't even that long to begin with. Skilled players should be able to get through the game in less than 2 hours, but the average gamer shouldn't feel bad if they want to restart from scratch either. These older classic games often rely on memorizing the level layout in order to optimize gameplay. Realistically, the more you play, the better prepared you are at conquering them, unless you're me who keeps missing the same jump over and over. Thankfully, the game's soundtrack keeps me sane whenever I have to replay the same level. If there's one thing most people know about this game, other than the difficulty, it's the music. Composed by both Kunio Yamashita and Satoi Terashima, the soundtrack invokes some very hard-hitting bangers. Just to name a few, the famous Vampire Killer, Heart of Fire, and Nothing to Lose. They really nailed the gothic horror theming so well for this game, and it only adds to the immersion and overall enjoyment of being a vampire hunter. Compared to most NES games, Castlevania stands out in regards to both soundtrack and aesthetic. The man behind the lore and concept can be attributed to Hitoshi Akamatsu. As a fan of Western movies, it was him that was mainly responsible for the movie-like quality of the original trilogy, including the humorous references to actors and characters in the ending credits. Not only did he deliver in creating a unique atmosphere, it was him who was very strict on the controls of the game. As I mentioned before, Castlevania is known for some rather stiff control. This happens to be intentional as he wanted to make it feel rather satisfying to the player, matching Simon's movements closely to an actual person. The game isn't very lenient on jumps, having you to fully commit to it as I said before, but for the game itself, that's alright with me, though I understand that it can be a hard sell for players who might be turned away from the difficulty, which is why I'd like to now turn your attention towards the Japanese release. The game's easy mode puts you at 9 lives, starts with 35 hearts, and allows you to keep your sub-weapons and double/triple shots upon death. More importantly, however, knockback is disabled. Shocker, I know. In fact, Akumajo Dracula might honestly be the preferred way to get into the original Castlevania. While difficulty and the arcade nature of the game worked well in the West, in Japan the easy mode would allow players to more easily get in tune with the game's mechanics and level design. Of course, I do need to preface this with saying that the easy mode is, well, easy. By that I mean you could easily curb stomp this game in roughly about an hour or so. Though if you're the sort who relishes challenges, it's not going to keep you entertained for long. And for most, that might honestly be alright. Keep in mind that the normal difficulty of these NES/Famicom games are meant to closely emulate arcade games. So if you just can't keep up, just keep playing on easy until you feel comfortable enough to step up. Combined with the setting, soundtrack, tough level design, and satisfying gameplay, it's easy to see how the series became as influential as it did. Despite how much questionable NES level design can rile us up, it was still the foundation for modern gaming as a whole. Castlevania starts off with a strong first impression, and it only gets better from here. Well, not in the next immediate game, but we'll talk about that for another time. Let me know in the comments if you have fond memories playing this game. Did you enjoy it, or did you find the level design just too taxing? Or if you've only played the other Castlevania games, let us know how you got into the series. I wish you all a good rest of your day. Peace.